I'm J.G. Michael, and this is Parallax Views. This edition of Parallax Views is brought to you by the $10 and above tier supporters of Parallax Views on Patreon. So, with that in mind, producers credit shoutouts to Galen, Matt, Gunnar, Mark, Simon, Alexander, Catherine, G, Tilo, Emilia, Jeremy, Jeff, John, Bert, Brian, Elliot, Michael, Brace, James, Nick, Mersham, Galen, Gareth, Arlen, Bo, Christopher, Michael, Gigadelic Media, Will, Chance, Chase, Dan, Big Bob, David H, Y. Kellerman, Sadeed 13, Kathleen, David, Ava, Bob, The West Bank Robbery Podcast, Jamie, Enoch, Gary, Max, Ishtofer, James, Martin, Matthew Ho, Brian, Nobody, Thomas, and Dano. And now on to the show. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. As always, if you appreciate the work I do on the show, please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. On this edition of the program, we have a returning guest, Israeli commentator, and I would say dissident, Ori Goldberg. Ori takes what I would call a rather reflective tone when discussing what is unfolding in Israel-Palestine, and in light of recent events in Rafah, I felt the need to reach out just because sometimes I feel as if these shows I do on Israel-Palestine are getting too caught up in the abstractions. Meanwhile, there is death all around, and it's quite horrifying. It's a harsh reality, and to be honest, I'm tired of all the death. Numerous masses of Palestinian children, women, and civilians. I also honestly want to see the release of the Israeli hostages being held by Hamas. I don't consider this a discussion about hate. I don't hate anyone. I hate the actions of certain nation states and other actors, and in general I think that nation states are almost inherently violent and paranoid entities, or at least prone to violence and paranoia, due to the fact that we live in a world system in which nation states are in constant competition over security, resources, and status. In that sense, I don't really consider Israel exceptional, but I'm probably rambling a little bit. I just am at a loss for words. The horrors we've seen from October 7th to now, as I said recently on my social media, it's just too much. I mean, the images coming out of Rafah are horrific, and that's why I had Ori on. These are his perspectives. We may not agree on everything. You may not agree with him on everything. That's fine. But I think it was a worthwhile conversation, and I hope you'll listen. It's rather intense in a lot of ways, I would say. I don't know what else to add. So with that being said, let's get to the conversation with Ori Goldberg. Welcome back to Parallax Views, the guest that I always enjoy speaking with. He's very erudite and has a sort of powerful way of speaking about what is happening in Israel-Palestine and what is happening in Gaza. I think he sort of pierces the veil in ways that others don't, getting into the sort of psyche of what is happening. And our guest is Ori Goldberg, who you may have heard on my show in the past, or even Owen Jones's show. He's become a commentator on Israeli politics and what is happening in Gaza. How are you doing?
I'm reasonably well. This isn't a good time. And I hope it doesn't sound pretentious, but what's happening at the greater level, I mean, of course, Israelis are not losing their lives, but all of it is sinking in, despite Israelis' very direct desire to ignore what's happening. It's sinking in. It's a strange time to be an Israeli.
I want to come back to that idea of sinking in and get into what is sinking in for
Mhm.
Israelis. But first, maybe you could talk about the. I mean, I contacted you because I myself don't know what to say after seeing the images that are coming out of Rafah, just the entire city in southern Gaza being essentially reduced to rubble, and then this deadly assault on medics in Gaza. Of course, now video has come out that contradicts the Israeli narrative of what happened, and Israel was having to walk back its original narrative about what happened with this assault. What are your initial thoughts on what has happened in Rafah, both with that particular incident with the medics and also just the airstrikes?
When we previously spoke, we talked about. I mean, of course, you asked me the question that is, I think, the $64,000 question about this, and that is, what does Israel want? What counts as an end game for Israel in this quote unquote war? Although now it's not even a pretend war; it's not a war because you need two sides to fight a war, and nobody's fighting Israel at the moment. And I said, and I got into a lot of arguments on Twitter and various other platforms. I said, I don't think there is a plan. I think there are lots of minor plans, there are lots of tactical aspirations or ideological desires, but I don't think Israel as such has a plan. And um, and I think the horrors that we're seeing coming from the Gaza Strip in general, but from the Rafah area in particular. And I don't know what is more horrible, the videotape recording the last prayers of an executed paramedic or the images of the desolation that Rafah is now. Um, I think that they support my assertion that there is no plan because this sort of chaos um, it comes from a very, very brutal hollowness, if you will, an emptiness. This isn't uh, destruction at this level. And, without even talking about the morality of it, um, I mean, Israel's narrative, as you rightfully called it, when talking about the execution of the paramedics in Rafah, was just so dumb. That it was horrible, but it was stupid. It was lame. It was so obviously mendacious, but not in any sort of clever or elaborate way, just in a kind of a remarkably childish, juvenile attempt to push back, to say it's not us, and it worked for us this far. Why can't it work now? We've denied everything. We'll keep on denying. I was reminded of an old Eddie Murphy bit on denial that is, I think, in his movie Raw, where he talks about how you got to deny everything all the time, always. That was what it was. There's nothing there. There's no ideological backbone. There's no goal towards which Israel strives. Not even the killing of all Palestinians, because truth be told, ask most Israelis whether Israelis want to kill Palestinians, and they will honestly say, no, we don't want their land. We don't want Gaza. We don't necessarily want them to die. But first of all, we have no choice because there are bad guys there who are after us. And second, the Palestinians made their choices. We can't take responsibility for anything that happens in Gaza. Even that statement, which is repeatedly heard from official Israeli spokespersons, is mind-boggling. The very notion that you can deny, the physical axiom that actions have consequences, that what you do uh, imparts a responsibility, places an onus on your shoulder. Israel is denying that. That isn't in the name of some grand plan. That is a society in tatters. That is a moral code and an ethic, and um, just generally a, a group of people with very little to tie it together, except for this ever expanding commitment to death, because that's the nature of inflicting mass death. Mass death is it's voracious. It can never be sated. It always wants more, and the more there is, the more it seems to be the only thing, the only currency, the only benchmark, the only virtue. That's what you have here. So there's no plan, and this isn't part of some devious scheme. What happened to the paramedics was very much a tactical affair, but it was a small tactical affair because all the soldiers involved had received orders from their higher ups, who'd received orders from their higher ups, saying very, very basically, footage of this has come out as well. Any person you meet in designated kill zones is a terrorist enemy. Destroy them. The only way to bring back hostages is to kill anyone you meet and take over their land, which again is completely fictitious because Israel has occupied the Gaza Strip 5 or 6 times over. So any attempt to distill reason from all of this, on the one hand, babble, on the other hand, atrocious crimes against humanity, there's no reason. That's what I think it is, and I think that Israel's behavior with every day passing demonstrates this. If you want, later we can talk a little bit about Israeli politics. Netanyahu is doing this as a politician, as a prime minister as well. He is being reduced to the level of, it's not even conspiracy theories, but that's what's happening. It's all the mechanisms for the production of meaning that are completely being eroded, that are losing any kind of relevance to the quote unquote narrative. I was ranting there, but really, it's difficult because there's a temptation to try and make sense of this, to see the fruition of some kind of plan, to really have a narrative, to be able to cast somebody in the role of villain. And of course, Israel is the villain. That's obvious. Of course, Israel is perpetrating a genocide, but that's not the point. Sorry.
I want to
Uh,
ask you,
yeah.
I've been talking lately with a few different people, ranging from James M. Dorsey, who spoke highly of your work, and also Dahlia Schindlin recently spoke with me. And one thing that I keep coming back to is there a gap in how diaspora populations and the population in Israel view what is happening? Are there things you don't think that the American Jewish community may be understanding about what is happening in Israel? Is there a gap in understanding?
I don't think so. No, I think the gaps are more conscious acts of will than they are gaps in understanding or exposure to knowledge. In a way, diaspora Jewish communities are much more knowledgeable than Israelis because the Israeli media has decided a year and a half ago that it was not going to report on what was actually happening. And when things managed to break through, then again, a year and a half of momentum that makes every piece of news or every bit of analysis critical of Israel, rabidly anti-Semitic. That works, yeah. But sure, I mean, Israelis think everybody's anti-Semitic, but even Israelis know. So I don't think it's a matter of knowledge. I think it really is a kind of a doubling down, a circling of the wagons. This is our last stand. If we don't win this fight, then we're just going to erupt into flame, or people are finally, the world's finally going to get us. Or there are a lot of motivations that I can think of for the
It sounds like
strategy of,
you're
yeah,
saying that there's a sort of apocalypticism in the air in Israel.
kind of, yeah, kind of. There's our natural tendency is to revert to the discourse of revival. And in a way, this war has also been referred to as the war of revival, the war, uh, where the war in which we got our mojo back. But there's also a sense of an impending apocalypse. There's a sense that things are breaking up. There's a lot of concern about that, but it has become more of a kind of a default position for more people than I can remember in my lifetime. This idea that we're on the verge.
I'm glad you mentioned the internal politics going on in Israel. I found it very interesting recently. I've seen that Netanyahu is making a lot more references as of late to the deep state. I think he's talked about the leftist deep state in Israel, and the U.S. is trying to thwart the will of the people in Israel. I think even President Herzog had to come out and make statements that were kind of pushing back on that recently, saying there
Yeah.
is no deep state. What is happening? Is there like a sort of conspiratorial mindset that is breaking through?
Well, Netanyahu has always been a Byzantine emperor in that sense. He's always had his court. He's always enjoyed and practiced very elaborate, very devious machinations meant to keep him in power and prevent potential heirs from emerging. But now, again, I think, in reference to what I said previously, I think that these are just lame imitations. Think of how low Israel has sunk. These are lame imitations of Trump. Right? This is how bad things are. This is just it's like he's got an attack of Tourette's. He doesn't say deep state once. He says deep state 5,000 times over a 2-day period. Deep state, he even ascribed at one public occasion, I forget which, he even said his late father, who was a historian of Jewish communities in medieval Spain, one of his last warnings to him, he said, was to beware the deep state, which is completely bogus because his father died before anybody talked about the deep state. Um, but again, this goes to more serious matters as well. Think of the Trump plan for ethnic cleansing, which had everybody in a tizzy for a while there, till about a week into it, Trump himself said that nothing of the sort is going to happen, and nobody's going to be forcefully expelled from Gaza. But in Israel, you've got people who are saying, we are working according to the Trump plan for voluntary migration. There is no Trump plan. But everyone's holding on for dear life. Maybe that's a better way of describing the general vibe than an impending apocalypse. We're
Did
on
you
a
say
roller
holding on
coaster.
for dear life?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're
Okay.
we're on a roller coaster, and we don't know what's happening. And Netanyahu just he latches on to whatever bone anybody throws him. I mean, look at the tariffs. Look at how our Minister of Finance lifted tariffs on American goods to try and placate Trump. And then when Trump placed a 17% tariff on Israel, then it became an argument about Thatcherite economics and whether tariffs were good or not. It, I use this word hesitantly because it's not a good time for this word, but this stuff is ludicrous. It's a farce. If you had seen politicians behave like this, and they weren't perpetrating a genocide at the time, and this would be a matter for the Daily Show. Daily Show would have a field day with
I was
Netanyahu.
gonna say, I thought you were gonna compare the way Netanyahu is talking to like not even Trump, but like an Alex Jones figure.
Yeah, exactly, and a Stephen Miller, if you will. Okay, not Trump, but Stephen Miller, like, but seemingly an ideologue, but really effectively just this tremendously unpopular kid still working on wreaking vengeance over past traumas. This is really lame. This is really half-assed stuff. Nothing here is comprehensive. Nothing here is strategic. Nothing here has any sort of horizon. Every day it changes. Last week we were told to brace ourselves for an impending American/Israeli strike on Iran because there were bombers deployed to Diego Garcia, and there was a strike on Yemen, the infamous Jeffrey Goldberg led strike. And this week, we've been told to brace ourselves for an Iranian strike on Israel. Nobody knows anything, nothing means anything, nothing has any kind of coherence or congruence. It's just all up in the air.
It's interesting. I keep getting very different responses to what's happening in Israel from both many of the Israelis I talk to, as well as even American Jews, both who are supportive of Israel and then others who are not supportive of Israel. And I keep hearing this sort of blame game going on, saying to me, "Oh, well, you don't understand. This is all the fault of the Gulf states. The Saudis and the Qataris. They're the ones undermining us, and they're secretly wrecking everything." And then I have others who say this is all Netanyahu's fault. And I noticed recently that you tweeted your own opinions on this, and you had I think not even harsh, but you sort of just pushed back on this idea that it's an external force that
Yeah.
is doing this to Israel. Can you speak more to that?
Sure. The Israeli center, and then certainly the center left, Zionist left as they're called now, is a firm believer in um, a villainous deus ex machina, and a God that descends from above and doesn't save the day, but ruins the day.
The sort
Because
of
what does
ghost in the
that?
machine. Yeah.
Yeah, because what does that mean? It means that we are good people, that it's not us, that we've been hijacked, that we've been turned around, that we've been subverted, but it's not us. We mean well and we do well. And given the opportunity to take our country back, and there's a whole host of um, racist baggage here. Okay, our country that was taken from us in 1977 when Likud won its first election. So we're talking nearly 50 years ago. But we got to take our country back. And when we take our country back, everything will be okay because we're good people. And the way to do that, that is the most efficient, is to find, again, some kind of outside villain, some anomaly, a glitch in the matrix, and blame it on them. Netanyahu is mad. And he's not us, obviously. I mean, the fact that we've been voting for him for 20 years is beside the point, but he's not us. Or Qatar, right? It's the Qataris. Now, Israel's relationship with Qatar, like a lot of other countries' relationship with Qatar, is ambivalent and complex. And Qatar does play influence games and is not shy about it. But to assume that Qatar possesses the clout to shape the Israeli mindset completely is ludicrous. That it is interested in doing so is ludicrous. The whole point of the Qatari game is to be quiet and discreet and leverage things when they need to be leveraged. But now the Israeli center is talking about Netanyahu as a traitor in the Qatari pocket, which is ridiculous. And even then, is Qatar an enemy state? Qatar was Israel's greatest friend. Qatar helped Israel rein Hamas in. Qatar has done a lot of good things for Israel. It's done a lot of good things for the United States. It is a complicated place, but isn't so? And then what happens is you resort immediately almost to the basest of tropes. Qatar is a sponsor of the Muslim Brotherhood, ergo, uh, not ergo, but that means that Qatar is responsible for trying to subvert the world. And there's no difference between Qatar and Hamas. There's no difference between Qatar and Iran. Israel's fighting the good fight, which is the Western civilized fight against the crazy radical brown people. And let's just get on with it and give the good people another chance at running the country. It's ridiculous. And the most mind-numbing thing about it is that it happens again and again and again. It's like an eternal loop, a vicious circle. You can't break out of it. Somebody always finds something or someone else to pin it on. But for example, I'll give you an example. There's a very prominent Palestinian intellectual named Azni Bshara, who was a member of our parliament, was a political leader of the Palestinian Nationalist Party, and some point he was accused of spying for Hezbollah, and he fled Israel and now lives in Qatar and is funded by the Qatari emir and so on. And ever since Qatargate began being Qatargate, then there were attempts to show how Qatar is subverting Israeli politics. And some pseudo-journalist came up with the idea that before one of the last election cycles, when the three Arab political parties, three Palestinian political parties, were on the verge of running together, they would have become a significant force in the Knesset. That was scuttled by a last-minute Qatari intervention, guided by this Azmi Bishara from Qatar, that drove the more nationalist party out and decimated the Palestinian political presence. And one of the more prominent opposition politicians in Israel now, a young woman named Naama Lazimi, who grew through the Labor Party ranks and is now, again, very prominent, protests, constantly issues statements, seems like a fighter. She tweeted, "That's what happens. You vote for Netanyahu, you get Azmi Bishara." Okay, so the full circle. You've got the center left now tweeting your classic anti-Palestinian tropes. They're not only subversives, but they're traitors. And ultimately, the worst accusation you can make against a Jewish Israeli politician is that they're being controlled by a Palestinian. Right? Because ultimately, the Palestinians are the enemies. So round and round she goes all the time.
On that issue of sort of liberal Zionists, what would you? I have a few that listen to the show. I'm curious what you would say to them at this point in time.
Look, at this point in time, I would say do whatever works for you as long as you are calling for an end to the genocide. Don't call it a genocide, call it a war. Okay? Do whatever works. Whatever works, that means ending this government's time in office and protesting and calling for an election. At this point, I'm very permissive. I'm not going to argue the finer points of ideological purity with them. I will, however, also say, and I say this repeatedly in Hebrew, that I doubt anything good's going to come of it unless these people are able to acknowledge the relationship between Israel's actions and the consequences, and unless they are able to talk about Israel's Palestinian population and the population of the occupied territories as people and see them as part of Israel's future, nothing good is going to come out of it. And of course, what that means ultimately, look at me being all Israeli, that ultimately means ending Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories. That is what it boils down to. Unless that happens, nothing profound, no profound change will suddenly present itself within Israeli society, because the current consensus within Israeli society is that you can't trust the Palestinians further than you can bomb them.
I just wanted to say this isn't a direct question so much as me bouncing some thoughts off you that I've been having. You know, sometimes I worry doing this show that I get too caught up in, looking at ideology or philosophy or Zionism versus anti-Zionism, and like seeing what has happened in Rafah just over the past few weeks. I almost feel like it's like weirdly disrespectful to everything. It's almost disgraceful to even think in those terms of, well, Zionism versus anti-Zionism. Like we're past the point where those are the questions we should be asking. I feel like it's like at the end of the day, we have 15 medics dead and a city turned to rubble. It's almost like everything else is secondary, and yet we always bring these sort of abstractions and philosophical debates to the forefront. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
No, of course I do. I mean, I've experienced a version of that throughout the past year and a half, even before these horrors in Rafah. I used to be active in social media, where I would write about myself, write about my life, write about books I'd read, share songs, talk about favorite sports teams, or have insights about Israeli politics or whatever. I don't do that anymore. I only do politics of this sort, or I only talk about what's happening in Gaza. So I completely understand what you're saying. I don't know if I have a very clear answer, but I can tell you that as an Israeli right now, probably the most radical thing I can do is to consistently try and maintain my personal voice in this grander arena. You know, a kind of a little bit of both. I need to talk about these I need to talk about these issues. I need to talk about the meaning of this genocide. I need to talk about what it might mean for me as an Israeli, what I think about Palestinians as a result, or whatever. But I need to do it as myself, not as the standard bearer for an established political cause or for a movement. I've become much more of a loner than I was previously, which, by the way, is one of the reasons I think I don't get a lot of attention from people who might otherwise treat my opinions as toxic. I don't claim to be right on behalf of anyone. I try and speak whatever it is I have to say. And you know, maybe I'll find myself talking about my life, but I I don't think that will happen. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think for the foreseeable future, at least as I can see it, I can't talk about anything else. I can only talk about this. But again, you talk about this certainly as an Israeli. I mean, you talk about this. You talk about the horror. If you do this day in and day out, then like everything, something. I mean, like any other situation, something happens. You know, maybe it stops being immediately horrific. You have to think about the effect. And I realized, and this might not be a very pleasant thing to say, but I realized that the only way I can talk meaningfully about this is if I stay myself. You know, if I insist on being a person vis-a-vis all of what's happening, not just talk, not just reflect or describe or be full of righteous indignation or whatever, but to try and be a person. And for me, that I guess that entails a kind of a starkness, but also um, an, uh, an integral complexity of sorts, not in the sense of justifying. Here, I agree with you completely. That I can't fathom discussions that are current on Israeli social media, sometimes along the lines of, you know, killing medics, yes or no. Uh, that's just, I can't do that. But I want, it's like, it's like the effect this has on me is like I'm shedding my own skin. And
What do you mean
I
by that? I'm just curious if you can explain.
I'll try. I feel like I'm all bones and tissues and sinews. You know, that I don't have any skin. I take it all in. I feel like I do it every day, and I feel like my hope. You know, I'm thinking of the famous the dry bones vision from Ezekiel, from the book of Ezekiel. The only hope I have of regrowing my skin is to acknowledge my condition. You know, I need to be who I am. And if this is what I am at the moment, then this is what I am. If I take everything personally, then I take everything personally. If everything, you know, touches me, if I'm blown, I mean, I had a week where I think at least like 3 times I tweeted something like, "I can't get past this," and then I got said the same thing about something else. And for a second there, I stopped and I thought, if if am I getting past the first thing by saying something about the second thing? But no, you know, really at the moment when I learned about, for example, the death of 17-year-old Walid Ahmad in an Israeli detention camp, a young man who had been starved and beaten and had developed intestinal problems so difficult that he became dehydrated and then just fell and died, hit his head and died. I couldn't get past that. So I needed to say that I couldn't get past that. And then the news about the medics, I couldn't get past that either. But I'm not, when I say I'm all skin and bones, I'm saying that I'm not trying to um, take all of this and cast it into some larger mold. I don't have a larger mold. I'm just walking around pretty much from day to day. And I'm not Palestinian. I'm Israeli. I'm one of the lucky ones. But that's what I feel. I feel like I have to just get up and read about it and talk about it.
Sort of bearing
And
witness.
yeah, but in a very immediate way. And sometimes I can be analytical and talk about what sort of light that shines on Israeli thoughts, but sometimes I can't. And I won't always just bear witness, but right now I'm in a period of the atrocities are such that I can't really do anything else. And so I've learned to trust that. I've learned not to seek explanations or not to think that by explaining I am addressing some kind of wrong or helping correct it or whatever. I'm really not. Um,
The way
sometimes,
I would put it, not to interrupt you, but
yeah, go ahead.
I almost feel like even in discussions here in America of what is happening, we can get wrapped up in abstractions, in grand narratives, and ultimately, I almost feel like it's a way to try to escape the reality, which is there's
Yeah,
just death everywhere,
yeah.
and the Palestinians are facing that. I mean, they are being
They're
just
dying.
wiped out. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, they're dying. You're absolutely
yeah,
right.
yeah, and like I said, I feel like it's almost like getting caught up in the abstractions is a way to almost try to
Yeah,
shield ourselves from looking at what is actually occurring. And there's no, like you said, it's kind of just stupid. It's not
yeah,
even like there isn't a grand design to it. It's just death. It's death and the infliction of death on
a-
masses of people.
absolutely. That's exactly what it is. And sometimes again, you make the full circle because if you're able to think about this in those terms, death being death, it kind of gets narrativist all over again. But it's another kind of narrative. It's not an Israeli narrative or a Palestinian narrative. It's a human narrative. And sometimes it's a biblical narrative in the sense of, it's even grander than the grand narratives of regional politics in the Middle East or Zionism, yes or no. Destroying a city, that's some biblical shit, you know? And the fact that human beings can be the agents of this, can generate this kind of, I can't, I'm not even sure what the right word is. Disastrous energy, murderous energy. I can say a lot of things about why this is happening, but exactly as you say, when you are faced with the images of a city leveled, then you shouldn't. You should just look at that and say what you think about it. And sometimes it will be biblical because it's biblical. And again, there's a lot to say about the relationship between the grandiosity and the dumbness. Okay, and in a way, this genocide that we're carrying out is I think unique exactly there, that point. How awesome it is and how dumb and lame it is. What it says about us, exactly when it doesn't say something about us. And that's interesting. I'll try and write a book about that. But when you wake up and you see this, then there's, you say what you say. You got to be a person, and as a person looking at it, the abstractions don't necessarily lend themselves. It's not abstract. It is death. And it is death perpetrated by Israel on the Palestinians who are dying. Israel is killing them and destroying their lives and their livelihoods and their cities. And that's what it is.
You wrote on Twitter recently. I'm going to read this tweet and then I want you to elaborate on it if you can. You said, "It is not coincidental that Israelis are now calling for a quote unquote an end to the war. There is no war. No one has been fighting Israel since it unilaterally broke the ceasefire. Previously, the Palestinians were monsters. Now they are Tolkien's army of the dead. Israelis alone are human." I thought that you painted a very vivid picture there, so I wanted you to elaborate on that tweet.
I've been thinking and writing about this again for a year and a half, and this is I think an insight that has gathered mass and presence in my mind. I really think Israelis don't see Palestinians as people, but that's not in the Jim Crow sense of the word. Uh, it's not about being subalterns or inferiors. They're just not supposed to be here. The fact that they're here is something out of a fairy tale, or in the case of Tolkien's Army of the Dead. You'll forgive me for geeking out. I'm not a Tolkien guy, but I remember that.
I wanted you to delve more into that line specifically.
Yeah. Well, the Army of the Dead, and if anybody listening has not seen the Lord of the Rings trilogy, I would heartily recommend it or go read the books. The Army of the Dead is an army of ghosts that lies in kind of a dormancy under a mountain range, and it was cursed because they failed to live up to their promise to come and. The details don't matter, but they're waiting for somebody to allow them to keep the promise, to come and fight for the good. And Aragorn, who ends up the king of humans, the king of Middle Earth, the king of Minas Tirith, call it what you will. He goes under the mountain and he gives them an opportunity to come and fight with him and his armies against the armies of the Dark Lord. And they do, and that's how that's how the good people win the day in the war. But they're not human. They do what they're supposed to do. They're there for this one single purpose. And there's somebody who's brave enough to go and say, "Come do that," and they do, and then they just dissipate. They crumble because they've been waiting for somebody to redeem them from their zombie-like state for forever. They're sort of ghosts and sort of zombies. So at first, the Palestinians were monsters for thinking that they could defeat us, but they were certainly not human, right? I mean, what they did on October 7th was, as far as Israelis are concerned, the most horrific thing any person can do. And anybody who can do that doesn't deserve to be treated as human. But now they're not even monsters because they've been decimated, not to say eradicated. Now Israelis are waiting for the prophecy to be fulfilled. Israelis are waiting for the Palestinians to realize, to do the one thing that would just make them leave our sight. For Tolkien, they were agents of the good. They were not good people necessarily. They were pirates, they were whatever, but and they were there because they welched on their promise. But they did what they were supposed to do, and then they were gone. That's why the Palestinians are. That's why I thought about the army of the dead, because that's what we want. We want them to accept our supremacy, and then we would like them to leave. So, yeah.
It's interesting. I'm reminded of I consider him a friend of the show, Jeffrey Aronson, who's written for the Cairo Review, and he's long written about Gaza. He wrote a piece a few years back and basically relayed a story to me about it, in which he was talking to a young Israeli friend of his, and he said that this young Israeli friend said to him, I just wish they would disappear in regards to the Palestinians. And this was spoken well before the current war in Gaza. Um,
This is,
it, it's an interesting line because he was really struck by this friend saying that. I just wish they would disappear because it wasn't even based in hatred. It was
yeah,
more like, I just want them to be gone.
yeah, that is our collective fantasy. Uh, but I mean, I remember when I was a teenager, I'll turn 50 in November, so we're talking a long time ago. I was a teenager. We would have these conversations when we talked politics, and the question was always the same. If there was a big red button that you could press, and the next day the Palestinians wouldn't be here, you wouldn't need to kill it. Would you press it? And everybody said yes. I won't try and pretend that I didn't. I don't remember what I said, but I'll assume I said yes because obviously it's a Jewish state. So what do you want?
It's not even driven necessarily. It doesn't seem like it's even a thing driven by hatred, which is
No, no,
interesting.
no. No, it's not driven by hatred. And it's not, I mean, there are people in Israel who are happy with the death of Palestinians. There are a lot of them, and they're vociferous. But even then, it's on a personal level. It's not part of the national state of mind. It's not hatred. You know, we don't have a choice. What else can we do? They said they want to kill us. If I may, I'll make another strange literary allusion, this time to the Chronicles of Narnia, to the voyage of the Dawn Treader, where as they're sailing, they visit all sorts of weird islands, and they come upon this man who's got white hair and mad eyes, and he tells them that he managed to escape from the island where dreams come true. And everybody on the ship says, "What, are you crazy? Why would you want to escape from there?" And he says, "Dreams, dreams, not wishes, dreams. Hey, dreams come true. Have you ever had a dream that you would not like to come true?" And they get the island is in a dark tunnel, and they get to it, they sail away from it. But every person of the crew understands what it means to have dreams come true, not wishes. In a way, that's what has happened here. That's the dream. The dream is that the Palestinians won't be here. Because if they're not here, then we wouldn't have to do this. But because they are, we do. And hey, look, we tried to make them leave. That was the whole point. Again, not in any kind of synchronized way. We weren't upset with their deaths, but we didn't set out to kill them, which is a defense I'm sure will be heard in The Hague when Israeli leaders or general officers are tried. But yes, exactly like your friend reported. That's exactly it. We wish they weren't here.
Yeah, and he also said that. I mean, he told me it's a very common outlook that sees that whole idea of "I just wish they would disappear." It's this
Very cool.
mindset that says that the Palestinians are the implacable obstacle to normal national and personal life. Is that also an element of this?
To some extent, yes, because the Palestinians, we Jews in Israel think of themselves as uh, me- meant or brought here to create a model society, a virtuous society, a light unto the Gentiles, right? Palestinians are forcing us to deal with the hassle of making sure we're alive. Uh, so if they weren't there, then we could do our thing. We could teach our wisdom. We could share our greatness. We could live in peace. Yeah, and on the one hand, what happened on October 7th, 2023, broke the illusion that we were on the verge of making that happen because we came close to making the Palestinians understand their place. And on the other hand, this mass death that we've been talking about, which Israel has been generating and wreaking for a year and a half, it has flipped on us, or we've had our priorities flipped, or our internal makeup flipped. We are now treating our fantasy as a reality that should be accomplished. Unless we make it happen in a way, then we've failed. Now, I think most Israelis have accepted our failure. they can't say that, but I think most Israelis have. I think most Israelis don't think we can win this. And winning ultimately means that the Palestinians won't be here in one way or another. And we can't do that. Apparently, we can't do that, which is also a blow to our collective self-esteem.
Wait, so winning means
It
within
can
that
mean,
Israeli. Go on.
yeah, it can mean a lot of things. It can mean establishing some kind of mechanism of control that would ensure Israel's supremacy. In that sense, look at what Israel is doing in the countries surrounding us. We we will take for ourselves the liberty of bombing or attacking whoever we want, whenever we want. That's winning as well. That's winning because we are the only ones who are responsible for our destiny. But others will tell you that true victory entails the departure of the Palestinians. Yeah. We can't do that either, obviously. It's not doable, even logistically, even in terms of financial resources required. But that's winning.
What do you make of the talk of I keep seeing this word in certain publications saying, well, we have to we have to encourage Palestinians in Gaza to voluntarily migrate. Do you see
Yeah.
this as what's manifesting? It seems like a pipe dream in a lot of ways.
First of all, there's the reluctance to actually use real life Nazi discourse, which is what it
Right, right.
is.
It seems like a euphemism. Yeah.
Yeah, we can't say this outright. And then again, it goes to the shallowness and the callow nature of the arguments made by the Israeli right. And they actually say things like, well, as long as it's voluntary, what's the problem with that? But that, again, that reflects on how we deny the notion that our actions have consequences. They don't want to live in Gaza. Why don't they want to live in Gaza? Does it have anything to do with what? Because Gaza has been demolished. That we deny that the demolition. We're not just denying action and we're not just denying act and consequence. We're denying physics, basically. The fact that we bombed Gaza has absolutely nothing to do with whether the Palestinians choose to stay there. We had to bomb Gaza, so we're scot free. It's not us. It's not on us.
You know, Another thing I wanted to mention was you mentioned earlier this mentality that you've seen in Israel that there's everyone is out to get us, everyone hates us, and I've seen that with a few friends that I've spoken to, or acquaintances I've spoken to, who will say, "Why do you hate Israel so much?" or "You hate Israel." And to be honest, I get very uncomfortable when someone says that to me because it's not really about hate. I don't hate someone who just happened to be born in Israel. I don't know what it means to hate Israel. I don't. It's. I hope that makes sense. It's just it's so foreign when someone says that to me. I don't really. It's not about hate. I'm just awestruck by the grotesquerie of what is happening. It doesn't have to do with hate. It's not about hating an Israeli child. I don't hate an Israeli child, but I just find it weird that the assumption is that I'm driven by some kind of hate of Israel when I make a criticism of the Israeli state's actions.
Do you see how askew that is? Why would it be weird for you to not hate Israel and be critical of Israel's actions? It's perfectly normal. The fact that it's reflected to you as indicative of something that's wrong with you is the freaky bit. There's no reason it should be freaky. There's nothing freaky about it. It makes perfect sense. And also all this love hate thing. I get asked by a lot of people why I'm still in Israel. Why haven't I left? Either to make amends at a personal level for Israel's crimes against the Palestinians, give them back their stolen land, or simply because how can a person who speaks and thinks like me live among such a savage people? And the truth is, not because I love Israel or because I hate other places. It's just like what we were talking about before. Sometimes life is life. sometimes things that happen actually happen. They don't necessarily reflect grander narratives. They don't necessarily stand for a choice made within the scope of a grand narrative. I'm in Israel because I'm Israeli, and my life is here. And I think at this point, if I wanted to leave, I could probably find a job somewhere. But I don't want to, again, not because I don't think anybody in their right mind could say I defend Israel's actions. Just because, this is my life and I have to make do with it. I have to navigate its complexities. And the notion that you either hate or love is ridiculous. That's not the way life works. Right? So what you're saying is perfectly normal. And the people who will have you think that there's something wrong with you because you criticize Israel and therefore hate it, they're a little crazy.
Well, I guess, I mean, for me, I'll put it this way. I do hate what the Israeli state is doing, but I don't think that's what they mean when they say you must
No,
hate Israel. I don't think
no,
they
no,
think I'm talking about the state. It's something
no.
more to them than the
Yeah.
state. Does that make sense?
Yes, of course. You're right. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Look, the more two-dimensional we've become in Israel, and the more two-dimensional our supporters have become, and we have become two-dimensional because we don't want to look, we don't want to see, we don't want to think about. But you know what? That's not even true. I'm giving us too much credit. It's not that we don't want, it's that we aren't. When you reject the fullness of reality and you become two-dimensional, now the more two-dimensional you become, the more it becomes dichotomous. You either love or hate. And obviously, yes, they don't mean your response to the actions of the Israeli state. It has to be everything. It has to be about everything. Uh, but that is not a sign of complexity. It's the other way around. It's the sign of superficiality. Because if you look at life like that, then if this wasn't considered a question of politics, if you were to act, I don't know, if you were a school child and you were to act like this in a school, you would not be allowed to stay in that school, right? Or you'd be seen as a problem child. And for me, to be able to say, to be able to debate the finer points of genocide is insane. Why would you debate the finer points of genocide? So you're the normal one. And the Israelis who are saying this to you, it's not that they're insane. It's just that they're reduced. They've got a reduced capacity. They're limited. Yeah, because that's how you survive here now.
I mean, where do you see this as heading now? I mean, I want to get back to the internal issues in Israel because it seems like, I mean, I know that Netanyahu, I guess he tried to fire the director of Shin
Shin
Bet.
Bet.
I
Yeah.
don't know what has happened with that, but it seems like there's a lot of domestic turmoil even beyond what is happening in Gaza.
Yes. There's a lot of domestic turmoil. And it may come to a head soon because the government voted to dismiss the head of Shin Bet on April 10th, which is Thursday, this coming Thursday, 2 days, 3 days from now, when he was supposed to end his tenure on the 20th. And he said that his dismissal was illegal. So Netanyahu has been floating the idea that the government will boycott the head of Shin Bet. That when he is invited to security meetings, the government will not work with him. I don't see how that's possible. So we may be coming to a point where the head of Shin Bet will report for duty at Shin Bet headquarters in Tel Aviv, and he will be escorted by, I don't know, dozens or hundreds of protesters against Netanyahu who will act as his personal guard. But he will be met at the entrance to Shin Bet headquarters by our national police, who are being ordered by Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is very much a supporter of Netanyahu and this current government. I have no idea what happens then. I have no idea if anybody fires a warning shot. I have no idea if they come to blows. Things are happening. Netanyahu may be able to stave off the boiling point by reaching some kind of deal because I understand he is off to the States. And I understand that Erdogan is pressuring Trump to try and resolve this as quickly as possible because Israel is coming to blows with Turkey and Syria at the moment. And I understand, I don't think Trump,
Trump
I
is
don't think,
he's meeting with Netanyahu today here,
yeah,
actually.
yeah. I don't think Trump likes Netanyahu. And in stark contrast to 2016, when Trump felt beholden to Netanyahu because Trump needed the evangelical vote, Trump doesn't feel very beholden to anybody at the moment. I don't think he likes Netanyahu. I don't think he likes the insinuation that Netanyahu, leads him on a leash. And I don't think he wants Netanyahu to spoil his plans for getting the Saudis or the Emiratis or everybody else to pour money into the newly isolationist United States. So I really do think that there's an expiration date here. I think it's likely that there'll be some sort of deal, especially now with Passover. I don't know what the deal will be like, but things in Israel are really reaching a boiling point. Again, a religious holiday sort of tends to obscure these very sharp issues and differences because everybody retires to their own family meal and people have days off. But this time,
When you say the stark differences, I think people are assuming maybe that you're talking about the political differences between Israeli liberals and Likud supporters like that support Netanyahu. But I think it goes deeper in that. I feel like even the right wing in Israel is at each other's throat.
yeah.
Okay.
No, things are. Um, there has never been a better time to quote Yeats about Israel at the moment, right? Things are falling apart. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Yeah, things are falling apart. Israeli institutions are falling apart. Coalitions are falling apart because even the Israeli right wing understands that Netanyahu is now engaged in a fight for personal survival. The lameness of the argument is understood by many, but there's still great fear with regard to Netanyahu because he really has built a Byzantine court around him and he's got a lot of dirt on a lot of people. But it's coming to a head because Netanyahu is now making accusations and personal accusations. The head of Shin Bet was the one who was in charge of investigating Netanyahu for this whole Qatari affair. Even people who would be willing to give Netanyahu the benefit of the doubt are somewhat disturbed by the fact that the prime minister is firing the man who's supposed to investigate it. But that's not necessarily the end of it. Trump did exactly that. So I don't know. I think look, the period after Passover is a weird one in Israel. Passover is a week-long holiday. It's weird because it's like national month, because we've got Holocaust Memorial Day and we've got Independence Day, which is preceded, day before Independence Day is Israeli National Memorial Day, which is when the national and nationalist narratives are all at top volume. And you also need to remember that even though things are falling apart and everybody hates everybody, the one consensus that still unites Israeli society is that Palestinians are not really here, that it's okay to kill Palestinians, which has a weird effect because on the one hand, you're out in the streets protesting against Netanyahu, but you're affirming his greatest act of state, which is the genocide. So we're not quite there yet. And in reference to our previous conversation, who cares? We need to be stopped because we're killing Palestinians. This isn't about waiting for Israel to change at its own leisurely pace. Thing is, pace is not very leisurely. things are heading towards some kind of clash. I'm not sure what that clash will be like. A lot of people have been talking the talk. Very few people have been following it up by walking the walk. We'll see what happens, and it will happen sooner rather than later.
What do you mean by
Uh,
walking the walk?
Taking to the streets to deny the head of Shin Bet the opportunity to get into his office. Okay, trying to take a TV studio with weapons. I don't know, things like that. This hasn't happened here yet because everything always pales before unity and the state and how we're all in it together and how we're all Jews and we got to take care of each other. And at the end, it's just us because nobody cares about us and so on and so forth. I think that things are falling apart. I'm no longer sure at what pace they're falling apart. I don't know if Netanyahu can jigger this again. I think he is just about at the end of his rope.
Well, we've
But
thought that many times before, though, to
that's
be
true.
fair.
That's exactly what I was going to say. And I was wrong before. I thought that common sense would prevail and we'll see a deal and he will understand that it's better for him politically. I was wrong. Everything that could have gone for the worse in this year and a half has gone for the worse. So I don't know. I've been humbled by the events. I don't know. It's really bad. There's really nothing there which makes the infighting much, much more vicious. And I don't know what'll come of it. I don't know when the line will be crossed between the line that separates, making brash statements and picking up an assault rifle and doing something about it. I don't think it will. I think most Israelis don't want that. And I think the consensus that underpins Israeli society is still pretty solid. But honestly, I don't know.
You mentioned Trump earlier and you thinking that Trump does not like Netanyahu. Could you elaborate on that and where you think that could head?
I
I know
think
you're not
that
an
yeah,
oracle and we're speculating here, but
no. I think in 2016 Trump felt like he owed Netanyahu something because Netanyahu was one of the first heads of state to reach out to him. But I think this Trump, in that sense, is very different. I don't think Trump cares about anybody that much, except for domestic American affairs. I don't even think Trump is enthralled to Putin as much as the liberal mainstream media in the States says he is. I don't think Trump cares. And that could have an effect because Trump could tell Netanyahu if the protests get more serious and if there's, I don't know, some kind of armed conflict or whatever, Trump could ditch Netanyahu simply for being a loser. You know, if Netanyahu is no longer perceived as a winner, and in a way he isn't, then it would be very easy for Trump to ditch him. And that would have a very powerful effect on Israeli politics because even now, the Israeli right is talking about the Trump plan and Trump support, and people are still talking about whether, once Mike Huckabee is confirmed, will Trump support the annexation of the West Bank? I don't think Trump wants to support the annexation of the West Bank. I don't think Trump wants that sort of commitment. And I think Trump has a lot of other interests in the Middle East that really wouldn't let him get entangled in this. And as every day passes, and Israel
is there a
appears to
fear
be,
about that? Is there a fear about that amongst elements of the Israeli right? Because I've seen articles in Israeli publications that alternately, but right wing publications that go from saying, "Oh, Trump is our hero," to "Oh, Trump's betraying us," and it can change within like a week or two, depending on
yeah,
things Trump has done or said.
it's true, but they'll take what they can get. So I think the general spirit would be quite pro-Trump, and Trump will save us, and Trump is, Trump's allies are the ones who overturned the sanctions the Biden administration put on settlers, and Trump knows what's what. Again, there's a lot of very creative wishful thinking here that comes from being pretty lame and just often very ignorant. These settlers, they talk to the evangelicals, they don't talk to the American political apparatus in general. And I think they don't get Trump this time around. So again, they will say Trump will save us and Trump is for us and what a good thing it is to have Trump. Maybe in their heart of hearts they'll be wary, but they don't have any other choice. It's not like anybody else. Not even Viktor Orban is out there to support them. So they'll hold true if only for having nothing else in their arsenal.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, because it's come up with a few other guests, I know we've talked about the physical death toll that has happened with Palestinians just being killed. Is there also sort of a desire for I don't know if I call it a spiritual death. There's almost this, I think there's this threat at times of wanting Palestinian identity to not be there. They're not Israeli Palestinians, they're Israeli Arabs. Arafat, it wasn't enough for him to say, I accept Israel exists. He has to say Israel has a right to exist. And therefore, Palestinian narratives about being displaced, they need to forget those narratives. It's almost like the identity itself is something that elements of Israeli society want sort of erased.
You're absolutely right. Very much so. That's part of the struggle against UNRWA, against the United Nations Refugee Agency, because UNRWA is in many ways the official keeper of Palestinian collective memory. Yes, very much so. Israelis are very afraid of the Palestinian narrative. If I were to be charitable, I would say it's because accusations of not really belonging to the land or the country is something Jews have heard. This is something Jews have heard often. And as long as the Palestinians are there, we would have no chance. But this has been true right from the start. I mean, right after Israel's War of Independence in 1948, after the original Nakba, the Jewish National Fund planted groves of trees on top of the ruins of Palestinian villages, and to make sure that they were not visible, that they could not be sites anyone could return to. This was back then. This was very much intentional because this was still an age where ethnic cleansing or population transfers were somewhat legitimate or semi-legitimate. So yes, Israel has been doing this for a long time, and this is very much a part of dehumanization. The notion that Palestinians have any kind of narrative but a desire to kill Jews is troubling to a lot of Israelis because
It
we've got.
also, I mean,
Yeah.
it has an implication though too, where I mean, you can have two different national narratives. Like I'm not saying Israelis can have their identity and their narrative, and I think Palestinians can have theirs. But saying no, we're going to impose this narrative on you, and if you don't accept it, uh, you know, there will be bad things
No,
happening to you. It
let
precludes.
me
Go on. I'm
let,
sorry.
no, that's okay. Let me just step in and make a little correction. We're not imposing the Israeli narrative on the Palestinians. We're just making sure the Palestinians don't have a narrative of their own. It's not the same thing. We don't need the Palestinians to be Israeli. Okay? Even the ones who live here and are citizens, we would like them to quietly bow their head before the inevitable. But as far as the grander Palestinian narrative is concerned, we don't want to impose the Israeli narrative. They're not worthy of being Israelis. They're not Jewish. They haven't suffered as we have. They're just a group of, a people, a peasant people who happen to live here. We just don't want them to have their own narrative.
Can I correct myself then? So
Yeah.
I guess what I meant by impose, I meant I think there is this mentality of the only way we will make peace with you is this imposition of a narrative. You have to get rid of your narrative and
Yes.
your identity. That's what I meant by imposition. And I feel
Yes.
like it becomes sort of crazy after a while because that's a lot to ask. And, you know, you can have two different narratives and they can exist and you can still diplomatically solve a problem. But if you're saying no, you're not allowed to have that identity, it precludes the possibility of a peaceful resolution.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And Israel's been doing this consistently since 1948, before 1948 even. So while I don't agree with the people who say that Israel's genocide against the Palestinians has been consciously and intentionally perpetrated since 1948, I see their point. Yes, Israel has been trying to, you know, the famous saying about the land of Israel being a land without a people for a people without a land, which Palestinians, pardon me, they're just not there. They're not there. Probably the most famous song, certainly one of the top five most famous songs in Israeli lore, was written after Israel's victory in the 1967 war. It's called Jerusalem of Gold. And it describes the situation before Jerusalem was, quote unquote, liberated. And it says the market square is empty. The caves in the mountains are empty. Nobody takes the road down to the Dead Sea. And after liberation, the market square is full. So there was nobody there. Yes, that was the point. And as that Israeli young man told your friend, it's not about hatred. It's just not wanting them to be here. Because if they are here, then that will always undermine our
Is it almost like a
inevitability.
ghost haunting the
Yeah,
yeah.
it undermines our inevitability. That's what we want to be. We want to be inevitable. We want there never to be any kind of incentive or justification that would drive us off again. We're here and we're here to stay. And anything that threatens that is not real. And the Palestinians are the main threat to that. So they're not real.
How, why are they inherently a threat to that?
Because they claim to be they claim to be a people born and living on this land, and that would make us conquerors, colonialists, people who came and drove them off the land. But that's what happened to us. You see, we can't be recreating that. That's just wrong. It's not part of who we are.
I guess though, but why can't you have these two people
Of course
living
you can.
together?
Of course you can. Of
Okay.
course you can. Of course you can. If you can have English speaking Canadians and Quebecois sharing a country, then of course you can. All you would need to find some kind of mechanism, but of course you can. Either in two states or in one, it doesn't matter. But what you would have to concede is that Jews are not superior, right? You would have to relinquish Jewish supremacy. And Israel is built on Jewish supremacy. There's one place in the world where we are allowed to be supreme. But we wouldn't have that. If they were our equals, then our place at the top of the hierarchy would not be promised. So, and that is a threat. As far as most Israelis are concerned, that is a threat. Add on to that things like Islamophobia, right? They're all crazy. They're Muslims. They want to kill us. They're against the West. They don't share our values, and so on and so forth. But the beginning is there. For Jews to feel safe, Jews cannot be anybody's equal. Jews need to be supreme.
I guess that leads into the last thing I wanted to mention, which is there a possibility that the greatest threat, though, in Israel is coming from within the house? It's like that. It's like when a stranger calls, the call is coming from in the house. And what I mean by that is, I mean, this has been, you know, decade after decade of, you know, okay, we'll do conflict management. We'll mow the lawn in Gaza. We're going to manage the Palestinians. And it hasn't worked. Uh, I mean, it's sort of repeating the same strategy over and over, and it hasn't worked. And inevitably, I wonder if that will actually lead to the worst possible outcomes for, I won't even say Israel, I'll say Israelis.
I think it very well might, because you're absolutely right. It hasn't worked. Yes, we are our own worst enemy. By all means, we're definitely much, much worse than the Palestinians. And remember, you asked me what I would say to liberal Zionists, and I said, do whatever works as long as you call for an end to this, but know in your hearts that nothing good will come of it until you consciously choose to end this process that you're talking about. And that's the process. The process is affirming Jewish supremacy, but this means or that means. Doesn't matter. That's what it amounts to. As long as you do that, as long as you cannot exceed on that point, then nothing of substance will get better. You might end the actual genocide, which to a Palestinian would mean a lot, but as an Israeli Jew, I shudder. I welcome every call to end this genocide. But I shudder at the thought that it's going to end in exactly the same way, where you've got politicians on the left, saying Netanyahu takes orders from Palestinians, so that means he's a traitor. Yeah, that's
The
exactly the
cycle
same thing.
starts again type thing.
It's never stopped. That's one thing I think most Israelis are either ignorant of or consciously unaware of, is how similar Israeli behavior has been throughout Israel's existence with regard to the Palestinians. We've never strayed from the path that we set ourselves. It's always been the same. We think there's this new existential threat every generation. Not so. It's always been exactly the same in terms of the pattern.
Anything you want to say in closing? I know I kept you a bit long here, but what do you want my listeners to get out of this latest conversation we've had?
Um, that to do, I mean, when you explained why you asked me to come on today, you said you feel troubled about the possibility of being caught up in the abstractions and losing sight of reality. I'd like your listeners to look at reality, and looking at reality doesn't mean necessarily inundating oneself with gruesome video clips and reels of Palestinians dying, but it means being very, very aware of reality and how simple and clear cut and concise it is. There is mass death being perpetrated here. It needs to stop. Uh, we need to do everything we can to try and stop it, even if the only thing we can do is talk about it. We need to make it present. We need to do everything we can to avoid the denial and the ensuing negation of reality. That's what I'd like your listeners to take out of it.
I have to add in one more question because I was thinking about it as you spoke. And I believe you may know him, but I had Yoav Shamir, the Israeli
Yeah,
filmmaker,
yeah,
on my show.
yeah. We're
And it
friends.
was interesting that you mentioned that feeling of being a loner because that's sort of what Yoav
Yeah,
said to me
he's
as well, that there's this
yeah.
sense of feeling alone, a sense of abnormalcy. What is that sense of, like, how does that happen? How does one become alone in Israel in the way that you felt you've become alone?
Oh, for me, it's been very simple. You go out in the street, you run your errands, you do your weekly shopping, you go to the bank, and you hear the conversations around you. It's not even the media; it's just the people, right? And
What are those
everybody.
conversations?
Those conversations basically say those Palestinians had it coming. Good for them. Good for us for killing them. They shouldn't whine so much. They made their choice. They made their bed. They should lie in it now. And you hear it, and you hear it, and you hear it. I'm not even talking about hearing it from close people, from people you admire or appreciate. That breaks your heart, but it's just being constantly attacked by it from all sides. The immediate mechanism of defense I chose was to just stay home or do my errands as early as possible when as few people as possible are on the street. And I don't argue anymore on social media, very rarely. I don't. I don't answer back. I write what I want to write, and if somebody writes something kind or nice, I'm happy to have a conversation. But if somebody wants to argue with me, I just don't, because what's the point? And that has led to changes in how I think about things, which we discussed. Thinking as myself, not thinking as the voice of reason or as the agent of goodness. What does it mean to be whoever I am in this situation? That's come about because I've been left basically with me. There are other people who think the way I do in Israel. There aren't a lot of people who speak out, but there are a few. And we know each other, and we try and have each other's backs and strengthen each other. But it's a daily struggle, and you end up being alone. And you know what? I'm okay with it. I'm not complaining.
Has it?
I
I hope this isn't too personal of a question, but has it changed your sense of identity? I mean, you still consider yourself Israeli. I mean,
I
what does it
do. I
mean to be
do.
Israeli? Yeah.
It means just, to be from here, to speak Hebrew, to have my family here, to have my life here, to have this be the language in which I think most of my thoughts. Just to realize that this is true regardless of what I think, of what happens, of what's being done. And maybe it's not true for everyone. There are people who left. There are people who left for political reasons, people who left because they couldn't deal with the situation. A lot of reasons. I am prevented from leaving for a variety of reasons. But even if I didn't have those reasons, I doubt I would leave. There's this sense that I am from here. I have a very wise Buddhist friend, Israeli friend, and we had an argument with two young up and comers in one of the very few WhatsApp groups in which I'm still active to some extent. And this friend, my Buddhist friend, and I both said, what are you agitating and acting for change? What change are you talking about? Nobody wants to change. And they said, no, it's keeping hope alive. We have to keep hope alive. And that's the only way to keep hope alive. And you're talking like machines. You have no sense of hope. So my Buddhist friend told them that hope was an illusion. They got really mad when he said that. And then when the conversation ended, we continued chatting. And he said, you know what, Ori, I made a mistake. I only said hope is an illusion. But what I should have also said was that despair is also an illusion. That's being a Buddhist. Despair is also an illusion. You're here. This is your life. This is what you do. You try to do the best you can in your life, not to subjugate your life or harness it to some grander cause, but in your life, in your practical arrangements, in what makes you yourself in the most intimate, immediate way. And I am Israeli. There's no two ways about it. So I'm here not. I think I'm an Israeli patriot too, but I'm not here for love of country, and I'm not here for any kind of noble meaning. I'm here because I'm here. And it makes immediate sense for me to be here because this is where things are happening, and this is what I'm keyed into, and these are the things to which I'd like to respond. Yeah.
Are you afraid of I have a lot of people asking me, both American Jews and also just Jewish friends abroad. Uh, there's this whole the Batar worldwide movement. They're going around claiming that they're making
Yeah.
lists, both
Yeah.
for American Jews, and they're saying we're going to create lists for deportations of Israelis. What
Yeah.
do you make of this? Is this serious? Are they, just trying
Serious,
to intimidate, or
serious to some extent, definitely trying to intimidate. I don't think it applies to me, not yet, because I've taken great care not to become politically affiliated. Uh, I'm just me, and in many ways, I'm so remarkably out there that I think most people just don't have trouble wrapping their heads around whatever it is I do say. Uh, and I am harmless enough, I think, for even Israel's current government to hold on to and say, look, we allow free discourse in this country, and I haven't been bothered or approached or intimidated or limited in any way. If I ever am, then I'll do something about it, but I haven't yet. So, I'm taking it one day at a time.
well, we'll leave it at that. I want to thank you again, Ori Goldberg, for coming on Parallax Views.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, that does it for this edition of Parallax Views. As always, please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. And with that being said, until next time, You've been listening to Parallax Views with Parallax Views to Parallax Views with Parallax Views.
The way out is not simply to say don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. If we don't do it, others will be doing it like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.